Our presentation is on archival research. Group members include Taylor Bass, Chad Frost, Lacey Hart, and Delaney Springer. Since the constraints of this project are that one person records is how we decided would be the easiest, this is Delaney Springer speaking. So first we're going to start off talking about what is this method and a little brief overview, I suppose, and why we get into why it's used and whatnot. So archival research is basically using historical examples of a text to support an idea of a writing. So our chapter included examples of researching school teachers on the plains during westward expansion in the United States. So that's an example of using historical artifacts and evidence to support an existing idea about that topic. It's humanistic, so it's basically researching human things. It includes documents like letters and firsthand experience, journals that people find. It relies primarily on historical archives like texts and photographs, other objects. I know in the university archives there are things like recipes to Taco John's and things like that, like their secret sauce or their meat mix, I think. So usually in archives it's like a one person doing the research. So if you wanted to write about a specific topic, you would go and do the research on your own in the archive, especially because a lot of archival materials include sensitive things, so they don't want a lot of people touching them. You can only bring a pencil in, things like that. A lot of the time, archives include primary sources, which allows the researcher to reconstruct a more accurate picture of the main research subject and object, but also includes secondary sources, which supports the primary sources and helps it fill in additional information where there might be gaps for the researcher, so they might be able to better understand surrounding elements of the specific object to give a more well-rounded picture, but so you can understand specific things about a person. For example, if you were in the Wyoming archives and you found the Taco John's section and you were like, oh, here's a recipe for their meat mixture, but you didn't know that they made potato olays bravo, so you were like, well, what's the point? Why would I even need this mix? Until you found the recipe for potato olays bravo or something along the lines. Additionally, it could require the researcher track down and seek permission from living relatives connected to the research subject. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So continuing on what it is, in the chapter that we read basically talked about developing a research question to make use of the archival materials. So like if you have a specific question that you're trying to answer, it'll make it easier to weed through stacks of archives. At the University of Wyoming, I can't remember the exact number, but I know the archives are just stacked full. I mean, it's like a library on steroids. They're just boxes and boxes full of historical information and things that maybe don't seem important outside of context, but within context might be really useful, especially to somebody writing a really specific writing studies type situation. So, archives help identify and locate primary source materials. Like I said, it's really direct information, so it comes from the source. If you learn about the archives, where materials are housed, and the rules associated with using them, I know at the University of Wyoming you definitely have to fill out information, but you can use, definitely students can use them, and I think the public can use archives as well, but you do have to fill out your information, and there are really strict rules, like you can't bring in food and water, and you can only use pencil, and you can only take pictures of certain things. It's quite complicated, but you also have to make sure that they know what you're coming in for so they can pull it from the racks for you and for you to study. So you have to develop a schedule to examine the materials, like I said, so they can pull the racks because they keep archival information in very specific temperature and as humidity and things like that. So if you're not using it, they want to keep it in that preservable environment. Archives are helpful to get specific information and help you gain a broader topic, broader understanding of the topic. But using things like libraries is also really important. But a library is also kind of a type of archive. It's just not as specific as the historical archives we're specifically talking about in our presentation. So continuing on this, kind of broad, sorry. Data management and research ethics, gather material and determine which is appropriate for the study. Do not hide materials which do not support the hypothesis. Take the best notes you possibly can and make sure to keep track of their origins for bibliographic information. Construct the narrative or analysis that arises as a conclusion of the research and obtain permission to publish from the archival source. That last point is really important as far as archives go because you're using their information. So even though it seems like to me it's not really obvious, like when you write a paper and you use a direct quote or something, obviously you're going to cite the source. But for archives, maybe you looked at a letter and you got some broader information from that, but you really want to make sure that you cite that source. And so now moving on to why the method is used and what circumstances is useful. This research kind of seeks to answer what was done and how it happened in the past and why it might be relevant to now. And also, how did we arrive to where we are today in terms of teaching writing would be like a specific example, like for this class. Archival research seeks to allow the researcher to answer such questions and to form, posit interpretations of events depicted in the research materials. And we can gain a great deal of insight from historical records in our goal to understand the development of researching and teaching writing throughout history. This study can identify historical methods in the archives to help us better understand what has been tried, how it's been tried, what worked, what didn't, what still needs to be developed, and help the researcher understand how and what historical and cultural pressures acted upon the research subject for it to have occurred in the manner in which it is recorded. So the method's strengths and weaknesses / limitations would fall under strengths definitely allow for depth in research, a wide range of timeline, and allows personal connection. Things that get put into archives are generally really personal information. Like when a person dies in a family, like a really big family or something, there might be documentation that not needs put in archives, but might be donated to an archive. When my great-grandma died, she lived in Cheyenne, and a lot of my family is from the Wyoming area originally, and we had a lot of documentation about family trees and our horse ranch in South Dakota and whatnot. So my family donated the information to the University of Wyoming archives, and it included stories about the early 20th century and things like that, and even into the 19th century. Just information that is really personal to our family, but is also really useful for researchers as well as the university in general. However, the weaknesses are that it takes a lot of time and also kind of allows for a lot of hearsay because it's kind of all opinion based. When you look at a letter from somebody else, you're not really involved. There's no direct commentary from the people involved, so it's kind of isn't very specific. The question we're going to answer is, what does this method yield in terms of data or information? What does a researcher do with that data and information? And how does the process help answer key research questions? Archival research is essential, and it prevents students and researchers from repeating older research when they're conducting what they think to be original or novel. Knowing the history behind what you're looking for is just as important as looking for an answer. Archival research offers the key to knowing what research has been done, what people think about it, what questions are still left unanswered, as well as what questions or hypotheses have already been concluded. In addition, archival research provides a stepping stool for new researchers to build their knowledge off of. This can mean many things, from understanding how people have been conducting research in the past, as well as knowing how to go forward with research in the present, and understanding that people are likely to build off your research in the future. This can also give them an idea of the format, steps, and nature of how they need to conduct their current research. Aside from these reasons, conducting archival research can also expose mistakes in past research on the same topic, which allows new researchers to avoid making the same mistakes. Make remedies to the current conceived knowledge of what that research produced, and prevent others who may do more research on a subject in future from using incorrect information. How does this methodology look in action? This is really important. We use some more articles to define that specifically, which I included in the sources, but they basically talk about the same thing as the chapter we read. The steps of archival research are definitely identifying the research topic and your research question, where you want to go with the information that you find in the archive, because going into an archive with no research question and no idea of where you want to go can be overwhelming, because there is so much information. But once you figure out your research topic and your question, you can find archives that fit that research. So usually, like on their websites, especially now with like the internet and stuff, there will be archives that fit a specific interest. So like the University of Wyoming has information on like the Wild West and things like that, whereas like I know some archives here in California have a lot on the gold rush and particular things like that, and usually they're pretty specific to the region they're in, but some might be a little bit off. Like in the chapter we read, it was really specific to the region because the archive she was using was in Salt Lake City, Utah, and it had a lot of information on school teachers in the West during westward expansion. So it's important that you find archives that fit the research, which are generally specific to the region, but there are archives that have really specific uses as well that don't have anything to do with the region they're in. The next step is to get permission from the various people who are involved. So both the archive itself, and if it has something to do with a specific family, you might have to reach out to the family involved and get permission from the extended family of the person you're researching or something of that sort. I think it kind of depends on what you're researching and who you're researching, but the archive itself would probably have information on that. And then carefully examining archives for valuable information. So even if you have a specific research question, there's so much to comb through and see the specific details, and you're not really sure what might be useful for you in the end. So if you need to better understand something, it would be best to actually know what you're talking about. What is this methodology's significance to researchers / teachers of writing? We go into this on the next slide. The significance is an asset to researchers and teachers of writing because it allows them to learn things with the right history. Being able to write or teach things, you must first know where it came from and how it works. Um, it's especially useful, I think, as teachers to teach about archival research because I didn't know about the archives at the University of Wyoming until, I had it in my intro to English studies class with Caskey, but also the first place that I heard of it was in one of my art classes. So I think that it's really important to, first of all, talk about archives so that students know what they are and how to use them, but also so to researchers who might want to know more about a specific topic. So if you don't know what there is to learn, you can't really learn it. So I think that it's really important that archives are there and that we know how to use them and teach our students how to use them. Here are our sources. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot us an email or comment on the discussion board for Chapter 8.